It's finally happening. Every once in a while, you watch a country change course so fast, so dramatically, that it feels like watching tectonic plates shift in real time. That's what we're seeing in Canada right now. I'll admit I've followed Canadian politics for years and never really expected to see a moment where Washington's grip would loosen this quickly. When the news first broke about Swedish jets and Chinese electric vehicles, I found myself almost laughing out of surprise, then quickly realizing the ground was moving under my feet too. In this video, we're not just talking about a policy change or some economic tweak. This is the story of a nation waking up from dependency and building a new kind of power, one that doesn't need American permission. It's a transformation that will change jobs, alliances, and maybe the very idea of what it means to be Canadian for the better. We'll look at how Mark Carney's government shattered decades-old dependencies, why Canada's military and auto industries are suddenly at the center of a global tug of war, what Swedish Gripen jets and Chinese EV reveal about the country's new playbook, and how these shifts expose the real stakes, power, sovereignty, and the myth that dependency is destiny. But let me put it to you directly. If you were in charge of Canada's next big alliance, would you double down on North America or risk a deeper connection with Europe or Asia? Which future do you actually want for Canada? Drop your answers below. I try to read all of them. Based on my past videos about Canada's partnerships with Norway, Sweden, Denmark, I've got a strong suspicion that Canadians love their Scandinavian siblings. But hey, am I wrong? Before we begin, just a very quick personal note. I've written a book called Awake, the Practice of Critical Thinking in an Age of Self-Lies. It's about how to stay clear, calm, and grounded, especially when the world starts to distort around you. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by noise or unsure whom to trust, this book was written for you. The link is below, along with a launch video if you want to explore that further, and it's also the best way to support the channel. There's a subscriber discount as well, so if you're interested, make sure you're subscribed and check out the links below for details. For most of my lifetime, there has been a kind of quiet fatalism about Canada's place in the world. You need fighter jets? Buy American. Want to keep the economy running? Keep the border open. Even the cultural shorthand for being Canadian is often defined by what you are not. Not American, not independent, not a threat. And that gravity has pulled on everything: defense, trade, diplomacy, even how Canadians sometimes see themselves in the mirror. In my view, there's always been a cost to this kind of relationship, a sense of permanent smallness, even though it's not true, as if you're always waiting for the next decision from Washington to know how big you're allowed to dream. Come on. The fact is, Canada reportedly spent about 80% of its defense budget on American-made equipment, and government officials are now admitting that our security relationship is too focused on the United States. It's clear. But the illusion of inevitability is a powerful thing, and it almost always serves someone, usually the bigger power. Critical thinking demands that we ask, who benefits from a world where Canada is always the junior partner? Who profits from dependency disguised as friendship? Canada's industrial base is another mirror of this. The automotive industry has long been framed as a page in the US-Canada playbook. Meanwhile, Canada's 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles shows how constrained the field has been for alternatives. The story is not just that Canada imported dependency, it's that this dependency, over time, became part of the identity itself. And when identity is built on what you are not, the pressure never ends. So today, seeing this pressure visibly loosen is very exciting, and I'm very optimistic for it. The first steps away from the scripts don't erase the past, but they open the possibility of a different future, a future in which Canadians define their terms, not somebody else's. And then almost overnight, the script flipped. Here's the headline: Canada is considering bringing Swedish-made Gripen fighter jets into its fleet. We are not talking just about hardware here, my friends. We're talking about rewiring the story of who gets to be in charge. Saab AB is not proposing a mere export deal. They're offering a joint venture, building jets on Canadian soil, training Canadian engineers, embedding technology directly into the Canadian airspace ecosystem. According to Saab, the program could create up to 10,000 Canadian jobs. Suddenly, Canada is not just a buyer anymore, it becomes the builder. I can't help but see this as a kind of narrative revenge. For decades, every procurement process seemed like a formality of some sort. Everyone knew the Americans would win somehow, but now with the F-35 Lightning II looking less inevitable and the Gripen stepping on the runway, something deeper is happening, I think. Canada is saying no, gently but unmistakably, to a whole era of automatic obedience. This deal is so much more than a contract, my friends. I think that it's a vote for sovereignty, and for the first time in years, is the American side that is looking rattled. Donald Trump, whose entire posture depends on keeping Canada close and dependent, is watching a historic asset slip away. If you ever doubted that defense procurement could be exciting, well, this is the rare exception. But while the world's attention has been on military deals, something just as seismic has been happening across the Pacific. China, after years of diplomatic freeze, has placed Canada back on its official list of approved tourist destinations. And that's just the start. There is credible talk of China lifting its punishing tariffs on Canadian canola, a move that could rescue thousands of livelihoods and, more importantly, signal the start of a cautious but very real reset. Here's the strategic kicker. This did not happen under Trudeau. It didn't happen under Stephen Harper. It happened after a face-to-face meeting between Mark Carney and Xi, 40 minutes that changed 8 years of hostility in a single handshake. When I first read these news, I felt a genuine thrill about this because this is what leadership is supposed to look like, right? Carney's approach is not about showmanship or sound bites. It's about respect, calm, and a willingness to play a longer game. That's not something you see every day in global politics, is it? But China's move is about more than tourism or canola here. It's about opening a door that's been nailed shut since the Meng Wanzhou crisis. A good critical thinker doesn't just ask what happened, but who benefits from you reacting a certain way. So ask yourself, who loses if Canada suddenly has more options? Who gets nervous when the monopoly breaks? This is a sovereignty story, the kind of story that says Canada doesn't have to live in someone else's shadow. Now for the part that frankly blows the ceiling off the story in my view. China is hinting that in exchange for lifting those canola tariffs, it expects Canada to reciprocate in the automotive sector. That means, finally, Chinese electric vehicles, EVs, on Canadian roads. Cheaper, faster, smarter, an end to the American auto giant's decade-long dominance. Analysts from Export Development Canada report that China already accounts for nearly 40% of global EV exports, and its manufacturing cost advantage in battery and vehicle production is enormous. For anyone who's watched the auto industry grind its gears in protectionism, this is something like a revolution. It's the moment the American car lobby has dreaded for years, the moment when they can't just rely on an obedient Canadian market. Suddenly, Canadian consumers get real choices, prices come down, and Donald Trump leverage evaporates. Reports show Canada is considering scrapping its 100% tariff on Chinese EVs, the exact barrier designed to keep U.S. auto-centric trade intact. You can feel the strategic excitement crackling underneath, right? Mark Carney's entire diversification strategy is about this kind of shift, finding independence not by closing doors, but by opening as many new ones as possible. And yes, if you want to see just how dramatic the consequences could be, check out the companion video to this one on the real-world impact of the Saab, Gripen, and Chinese EVs. It's all linked below. But there's also tension here. Re-engaging China risks angering Washington, as if they're not angry enough. It forces Canada to balance on a high wire. How far can you stretch before something snaps? It's the kind of issue that punishes emotional thinking, but also punishes apathy. But still the facts remain. Dependency has a cost. And today, for the first time in a generation, Canada seems ready to pay the price for something bigger. It's real, it's risky, but it's exhilarating sovereignty, right? No matter where you stand on the details, it's hard not to feel a kind of exhilaration at what's unfolding here. Canada is not just reacting anymore. It is leading, stepping out of the shadows of bigger countries and building alliances that actually reflect its own interests. That's what excites me most. The sense that after decades of being defied by someone else's gravity, there's a real chance to redraw the map, not just for Canada, but as a lesson for every country that feels boxed in by old dependencies. There is hope for everyone. So circling back to a question, if you could choose Canada's next big partnership, where would you steer the ship? Towards the familiar safety of North America or into the open water with Europe and Asia? I think the answer says as much about hope as it does about strategy. And maybe the real lesson for all of us here is that the end of inevitability might just be the beginning of agency. When you're no longer trapped by what's always been done, you start to see how many doors are actually open. As always, the full analysis of the Saab Gripen story is linked below, along with a related deep dive on how global power is realigning in the Carney era. I hope you'll join me there. But before you go, if you've ever found yourself wondering how to make sense of these turning points, or if you just want sharper tools for thinking clearly when big power shifts are happening, I wrote a book called Awake, the Practice of Critical Thinking in an Age of Self-Lies. It's about finding your footing and your optimism, even as headlines and alliances change by the hour. You'll find the book in the launch video link below, and there's a subscriber discount if you'd like to explore that further. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. If you enjoy the analysis, consider subscribing. There's always more coming, always with a focus on clarity, strategy, and the well-being of ordinary people. And if you're ready for a deeper dive, check out these other videos linked here, especially the one on the Saab Gripen's impact. Until next time, stay awake, stay curious, and keep building towards something better.